Well, good morning, everyone, and it's a great opportunity to welcome everyone to Hearing Room 1. As I look out at our panel this morning, it's a little role reversal for us. We're usually on that side of the bench, and I want to thank our first panel for taking the time out of your hectic legislative schedules to be with us. We have a very ambitious agenda here this morning. We are going to spend the next 6 hours on a topic that if you asked me or any one of my colleagues 9 months ago that we would be dealing with this type of issue, I would have laughed at you because had we known then what we know now, we might be in a little different spot. But this is an opportunity for the Commission to hear from all the interested parties in the transportation sector across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And we seek input here today to help us as a commission go through this process of potentially updating some of our antiquated regulations. And when I say antiquated, I look at some of our processes and procedures that date back to the 1950s. And we're honored to work with the legislature to address some of these issues. And I know the panel here this morning will be taking up some of those issues. Obviously, we want to hear from you. We want to get your perspective on various issues, from whether we should eliminate the need requirement for transportation applicants to whether we should amend our regulations to allow for new app-based transportation providers. The PUC clearly wants to get this right, and we cannot do that without your input here this morning. Before I recognize Commissioner Whitmer for her opening comments, I'd be remiss this morning in not recognizing our Chief Counsel, Buck Panque, and Crystal. Where's Crystal? And Eric, I'll give you a shout out as well. They did a phenomenal job in helping put together today's agenda, and I think I know all my colleagues join me in thanking them for what they've been able to do here for us in this agenda. With that, I want to recognize now Commissioner Whitmer for purposes of her opening remarks. Commissioner Whitmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will take a page from the playbook of our colleague, Commissioner Cawley, who we joke is our resident historian. So sorry about that, Commissioner Cawley, stealing your thunder. The General Assembly in 1907 actually created the Pennsylvania State Railroad Commission, which was the first public utility regulatory agency. And at the time it was created to regulate railroad, streetcar, and telegraph companies. That was at a point in time when most people did not have private vehicles and or access to a lot of mass transportation. But we've now moved through history to a time where most people either have their own private vehicle or much more accessibility to mass transportation. Since my start at the PUC, I've never been one to shy away from making changes to regulations when situations warrant. For example, changes to our natural gas marketer regulations. I'm also fully embracing our pending rulemaking for the motor carrier vehicle list and vehicle age requirements. Changes to enhanced competition in the electric retail market, as well as our pending review of potential changes to the natural gas retail market. Having said that, I understand that there are potentially some underserved areas in the Commonwealth with regard to public transportation that need to be addressed, and that's why we're here today to talk about our regulations and whether or not they are still appropriate given modern technology and changes to transportation accessibility. Even though I fully embrace the free market and the innovation that it brings, I firmly believe that the public needs to have a place where they can come and to have their concerns about public safety and service quality addressed as well as answered. I look forward to hearing from all of the stakeholders and to have a productive discussion about where our regulations are and where they need to go in order to keep up with the transportation market as it exists today. So with that, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity to have these opening remarks.
Thank you, Commissioner Whitmer. Are there any additional opening comments? Okay. Hearing none, it's a pleasure to welcome here this morning You can tell this is an important hearing because we have the Chief ALJ Rainey, Charles Rainey, with us this morning. Judge Rainey will go through the ground rules for today's hearing. Judge Rainey, I now want to recognize you to begin this morning's hearing.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice Chairman, Commissioners. Good morning, legislators, other witnesses, and members of the public. My name is Charles Rainey, and I'm Chief Administrative Law Judge for the Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission. Welcome to this en banc transportation hearing at docket number M-2014-243-1451. Today's hearing, as the Chairman stated, is an ambitious one. The agenda for today's hearing was placed on the Commission's website. I will introduce the panels. I will introduce them by name, and they are then to proceed one after the other with their testimony. I ask the witnesses to help us today to stay on time. All witnesses are to speak into the microphone so that they are heard. Today's hearing is being video streamed live on the Commission's website. We have 5 panels here today: Pennsylvania legislation, transportation network companies, insurance perspectives, other government regulators, and transportation industry associations. The Commissioners will have an opportunity to ask questions of the panelists at the end of each panel. There will be periodic breaks taken during the proceeding. The witnesses have filed written testimony with the Commission in regard to the oral testimony they will give here today. Their written testimony is posted on the Commission's website. The purpose of this hearing, as stated, is to gather information and policy recommendations for the future. The Commission is interested in testimony regarding whether its current transportation regulations for motor carriers should be revised or otherwise updated. The Commission is also interested in views on whether it needs new regulations or amendments to the Public Utility Code in regard to the transportation network companies. It is noted that legislation regarding transportation network companies has been introduced by several legislators. In summary, today's hearing is forward-looking only and legislative in nature. There are a number of transportation cases pending before the Commission. As required by law, the Commission will decide those cases based solely on their review of the written testimony and the written decisions of the administrative law judge. For that reason, the witnesses have been directed not to testify at today's hearing regarding matters that are the subject of contested proceedings pending before the Commission. We will now begin today's proceedings. We first have the Pennsylvania legislation panel. Those members of the panel are State Senator Wayne Fontana, State Representative Anthony DeLuca, State Representative Eric Mulchaney, and State Representative Mark Mustio. I ask them to proceed with their testimony.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Paulson, Vice Chairman Coleman, and Commissioners Brown, Colley, and Whitmer. Before I begin, I do want to thank all of you and the members of the PUC for their interest and your fairness and all your efforts to encourage the growth of transportation network companies in Pennsylvania. These promising new transportation ride-share alternatives accommodate riders by providing more options, access, and flexibility, and I believe they will prove to be an asset to Pennsylvania's public transportation network. That was demonstrated to me by the hundreds of emails and comments I received from my constituents in support of the Uber-Lyft transportation services in Allegheny County. Citing public safety, the Commission took what you felt was a justifiable and necessary step in June in imposing its cease and desist order. However, recognizing the viability and the importance of this new transportation alternative, I am pleased to add that the PUC also quickly acted to grant the 2 rideshare companies with limited temporary emergency authority to continue operating in Allegheny County while committing to work with us in establishing a more permanent resolution. Recognizing the need to establish workable legal and regulatory authority for governing these new businesses, members of the PUC worked closely with me in drafting Senate Bill 1457. Before I discuss some of the specifics of what my bill does. Let me briefly reiterate the transportation network company, what they actually do. In the simplest of terms, these rideshare entities such as Lyft and Uber connect riders with available rides using smartphone technology. The driver and rider connect, and a fee is charged for the transportation. It's an exciting concept that will revolutionize our transportation industry for many years to come. Again, while I support legalizing and encouraging the growth of Pennsylvania's rideshare industry, it's also important that we properly regulate and make this new transportation alternative safe. Senate Bill 1457 would provide reasonable regulation, restrictions, and oversight. For example, the measure would require transportation network companies to establish driver training programs, have a zero-tolerance alcohol and drug use policy, have adequate liability insurance coverage, implement a thorough background check system, and maintain detailed records. My legislation would also mandate that rideshare drivers have an updated photo in plain view. It also would ban drivers from picking up passengers who attempt to hail the vehicle while in use. Senate Bill 1457 is currently before the Senate Committee on Consumer Protection and Professional Licensure. With a limited session schedule for the General Assembly this fall, I have made a request of the committee to consider the legislation upon the Senate's return to session September 15th so that we can get it to the governor's desk prior to the expiration of the current legislative session in November. I believe communication to the committee, from the committee and the administration, by the commission and the public, asking to expedite the process would be useful and certainly much appreciated. While this legislation works its way through the General Assembly, I'm pleased that the PUC has made it possible for these businesses to continue serving their customers in the meantime. I'm also encouraged that you have scheduled these hearings on this issue, receiving testimony and input from a wide variety of advocates, opponents, regulators, and others can only strengthen our efforts to construct the best possible law. It will also help us to provide the best possible fit for our state's transportation network. As new transportation options and alternatives continue to make their way into Pennsylvania, I'm hopeful my legislation can serve as a model for encouraging that growth while seeing to it that public safety remains the top priority. So hopefully the full Senate will act on Senate Bill 1457 when it reconvenes in September. The sooner we can enact the necessary safeguards and oversight, the better it will be for companies that offer rideshare services, and well as for people who rely on this new transportation option. To me, new business models such as transportation network companies make good use of cutting-edge technology to help bridge some of the gaps, shortfalls, and shortcomings in Pennsylvania's public transportation network. It's not fair or sensible to limit or ban these new alternatives from reaching their potential in our state. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Representative DeLuca.
Thank you. First of all, let me thank the commissioners for giving me the opportunity to testify. And I want to thank you for letting the public hear what is going on today. I want to first state my support for this new innovative ride-sharing model in the Commonwealth known as Transportation Network Companies, TNCs. My constituents in Western Pennsylvania are craving this type of competition and welcoming this new transportation model to our region. However, as Democratic Chairman of the House Insurance Committee, I can only put my full support behind the certification of TNCs if they meet certain necessary and common sense insurance requirements. At least one piece of legislation was introduced prior to the temporary orders being issued by the PUC, and several more have been introduced since this order was issued. I was very pleased to see the contents of the temporary orders issued by the PUC on July 24, 2014. Soon after those orders, I introduced House Bill 2446. Although I would expect most of the bills being introduced to be similar, my comments today will specifically focus on the insurance aspects of my legislation and your temporary orders. I believe adequate auto insurance coverage is a vital part of public safety. The success of this new transportation modal will greatly depend on how safe it is. Without primary commercial coverage and adequate coverage limits, I believe this mode of transportation could put the public at risk. Commissioners, I could not have been more pleased with the temporary orders. As I read the orders, I felt comfortable with the primary commercial insurance coverage that will be required. I was also pleased that the required coverage limits for these TNCs will exceed the current levels required for taxi cabs under the PUC regulations. Maintaining $1 million of liability coverage per incident and $1 million in uninsured, underinsured coverage is reasonable for the protection of our citizens. Of course, bodily injury, property damage, first-party medical, and first-party wage loss are all vital insurance pieces to protect our citizens as well. Now, many times, people don't focus on their coverages until there's an accident and it's too late. But even more important are two aspects of your order in my legislation, which I would like to highlight. First, during stage one, when a TNC driver is behind the wheel with an app open, there has been some questions as to whether the insurance coverage provided by the TNC will be primary coverage or excessive coverage. As far as I am concerned, it is very clear that commercial coverage must also be the primary coverage of drivers from $1. This coverage must extend from the time the app is open until the passenger exits the vehicle. I concur with the Commission that the driver is on the clock and working when the app is open, and therefore the driver needs to have their vehicle covered by a commercial policy from that point forward. The last thing, Commissioners, I want to see is a situation like the one that occurred in San Francisco, where a 6-year-old was struck and killed by an Uber driver, and there was a question as to which insurance policy was in effect. I think that case is, to my knowledge, that case is still going on. Almost all personal auto insurance policies written in Pennsylvania contain a standard livery exclusions. These livery exclusions make it all but impossible for a TNC driver to have their claims paid by their personal auto insurance providers. Therefore, it makes no sense for a TNC to offer an excess commercial policy that drops down after a driver's personal insurance has paid for or denied the claim. I am glad that the Commission rejected this type of insurance coverage, which was contained in the original TNC applications. Second, I agree that TNC should be required to direct drivers to notify their personal insurer in writing of their intent to work as a TNC driver. TNC should also be required to maintain copies of these notifications for each driver during their affiliation with the TNC and for a period of 3 years following the driver's termination. I also concur with the requirements that TNCs notify drivers whether they are providing comprehensive and collision coverage during service. A copy also would be maintained for 3 years. The last thing we want to see is more fraud in the insurance market due to the new mode of transportation that causes confusion on which policies will cover a claim. In closing, I want to reiterate my support for transportation network companies in the Commonwealth. But I want to see us get this right and getting it right means requiring proper insurance coverage to protect the citizens of this great Commonwealth. Again, I want to thank you for the opportunity and the honor to testify before you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. We have Representative Erin Mulchaney, who is here today. Good morning.
Good morning. I apologize for being late. I just got off the turnpike from Pittsburgh, so.
Very well. Please proceed with your testimony.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Chairman Paulson, honorable commissioners, and guests. My name is Erin Mulchaney, and I currently represent the 22nd Legislative District in the Pennsylvania General Assembly. I want to first take the opportunity to thank everyone involved in today's hearing. I'm here today to testify as to the need in the Pittsburgh region for affordable and viable transportation alternatives, a need that is not a recent development, but an issue that has become problematic for some time. Speaking from personal experience, I came to Pittsburgh to attend college in 1995, and as a student without a vehicle, navigating around Pittsburgh was not always easy. From time to time as a student, to nearly every professional role I've had since, the need for increased access to transportation alternatives has been a concern of mine, given that I worked and lived in the city of Pittsburgh. I gladly welcome the conversation that has been spurred by the growth of transportation network companies, or TNCs, in Pennsylvania, and the fair consideration given to new innovations by the Public Utility Commission. I can honestly say that since moving to Pittsburgh almost 20 years ago, the city has changed dramatically. Pittsburgh's downtown corridor has become an attractive business and cultural center and a safe and vibrant cosmopolitan neighborhood with residential properties in high demand. Pittsburgh has seen itself repeatedly ranked atop lists of most livable cities, most recently by The Economist, and the best trips in the world by National Geographic. We are on the map in a big way, and now more than ever, we must raise the bar and at least keep up, if not become, the leader when it comes to our transportation options. Given that the topic of today's hearing is to examine transportation needs, I do not intend to offer specific regulatory recommendations, but rather to provide anecdotal support for Senator Wayne Fontana's legislation regulating transportation network companies. It's Senate Bill 1457. I intend to highlight more than a decade of initiatives by local organizations that I have been involved with, designed to improve and address Pittsburgh's transportation shortcomings. I also hope to encourage the PUC to develop regulations that more readily address market needs by welcoming consideration for innovation outside the scope of the current structure of the transportation industry. I first advocated for better transportation options in 2002 when I became involved with an organization called PUMP, which stands for the Pittsburgh Urban Magnet Project. PUMP was the largest and most active young professionals organization in the region. We had about 6,000 or so members. And it was charged with attracting and retaining the elusive 20 and 30-somethings through civic engagement, professional development, and social networking opportunities for the demographic. Recognizing that young professionals want to live and work in communities that have transportation options and vibrant nighttime economies, PUMP's Transportation Committee focused on advocacy related to creating a vibrant and connected city by improving its transportation options. One of the first attempts at addressing need and better connecting young people to the city was a project called the Ultraviolet Loop. The UV Loop, as it was known, was a collaboration between the Port Authority of Allegheny County, the Pittsburgh Urban Magnet Project, Ground Zero Action Network, and then Councilman Bill Peduto's office. Ultraviolet Loop buses were multi-purpose. They provided for night owl workers and students without cars, offered convenient transportation to popular destinations, created an alternative to driving and paying for often hard-to-find parking, stimulated businesses around the city, and were meant to cut down on people driving under the influence. The project was funded by several local foundations, including now Mayor Bill Peduto, then Councilman Peduto. The UV Loop was also funded by the foundation community, and it was a dedicated bus route that encircled the city, stopping at many of Pittsburgh's great neighborhoods and entertainment highlights, including theaters, restaurants, and other performance and cultural destinations. The UV Loop addressed a need and supported the young professional populations that Pittsburgh sought to retain, evidenced by a ridership survey that showed that more than 60% of the passengers on the UV Loop were under 30 years old. Unfortunately, the route was discontinued in 2004 when outside funding stopped and service cuts were made at the Port Authority. The UV Loop was just the first attempt at addressing the city's unmet transportation needs. The second major attempt to address the need for improved transportation service came in 2004 when, again, the Pittsburgh Urban Magnet Project identified the lack of available cabs as an issue of concern to its young professional members. That year, PUMP hosted a dialogue between Pittsburgh cab companies and its members, a project affectionately known as Taxi Cab Confessions, to express concerns and frustrations associated with Pittsburgh's seemingly non-existent cab service, and hopefully to come up with solutions. By way of background, Pennsylvania had just lowered the blood alcohol level for intoxication at the same time that the parking rates were rising around that time in 2004. There was a need and a desire for increased transportation options, especially for those seeking responsible and safe transport home at the end of the night. According to the Post-Gazette, between 2001 and 2004, there were 7 cab stands in the city of Pittsburgh, 6 located in downtown Pittsburgh, and 1 located in the Strip District. Despite a good dialogue, however, no resolution was reached. Residents in most neighborhoods were left without a reliable taxi service as a viable transportation option. One of the latest private attempts to solve the gap in transportation alternatives is Pittsburgh's recent focused efforts on better managing its nighttime economy. In the last 20 years, business districts in Pittsburgh's South Side and Lawrenceville neighborhoods have changed dramatically. Through focused revitalization efforts, these city neighborhoods have become destinations for those seeking restaurants, boutiques, bars, and cultural amenities. This kind of neighborhood renaissance and economic development boom, however, has come with several challenges. Pittsburgh's South Side neighborhood has one of the highest concentrations of liquor licenses in the state. Unfortunately, this one neighborhood has seen an increase in reported crime and has become a focus of Pittsburgh police resources on weekend evenings. In 2010, City Councilman Bruce Krause engaged the Responsible Hospitality Institute, a national organization that provides consulting and recommendations to cities seeking to better manage their nighttime economy. Working with RHI and Councilman Krause, I was not surprised to hear that an essential component to their management plan was moving people efficiently and safely away from the business districts after the bars and restaurants had closed at the end of the night. With Pennsylvania ranked 4th in the nation for DUI fatalities, the regulation and influx of transportation network companies like Lyft and Uber could prove to be an important component of any city's overall plan to ensure everyone can enjoy the attractions of nightlife and get home safely. Given my involvement in all of these initiatives as a private citizen, it should have been no surprise to anyone when, as an elected official, I carried my concern over transportation alternatives, which had by then become a passion of mine, to Harrisburg. I was outspoken as an advocate of Act 89, the 2014 infusion of revenue to roads, bridges, and mass transportation across the Commonwealth. I see that the act is a first step in many we need to take to make Pittsburgh and Pennsylvania attractive and competitive in the 21st century. My passion is one of the reasons I'm here today to share with you my personal experiences with this issue. Lyft and Uber are the latest iterations of a possible solution to an ongoing need. I am excited their operation has sparked enthusiasm for the future of transportation options in Pittsburgh like I have never seen. So on the question of a needs standard, I submit my remarks, point to the constituent outcry for the continuation of these TNC services and the overwhelming success of both these business models in cities across the United States and in sharing economies around the world. I compliment the PUC on a process that has resulted in granting experimental licenses. I commend the ride-sharing companies on the stringent guidelines and insurance policies that at times exceed standards by statute, and I overwhelmingly support Senator Fontana's efforts with Senate Bill 1457. Thank you for taking the time to hear my testimony.
Thank you, Representative Mulchaney. We next have Representative Mark Mustio. Please proceed with your testimony.
Thank you, Judge. And at the conclusion of my testimony, would I be permitted to read a 4-paragraph letter from Representative Killian, who was unable to attend today?
Yes, you may.
Thank you. I would also like to thank the commissioners for their time this morning, but also for your time and efforts over the last several months in trying to make sure that those that are operating in Pennsylvania under this new concept do so in a safe manner, but also in a manner that the public is protected in the event that some tragic accident does take place. My remarks, a lot of which would be encompassed in what the previous testifiers have already said, but I would like to kind of dovetail into some more specifics, perhaps, since we are being televised. Perhaps some of my constituents are watching, and those that are calling me and writing me saying, why aren't you supporting these efforts to put TNCs in place? After I get done explaining to them on the phone some of the pitfalls, they say, oh, I wasn't aware of that, but fix it. So that's what the legislation that we all have is going to try and do, is fix it, but we certainly want to do that with your input and the vast knowledge and experience that you have in regulating these types of businesses. I support a fair and safe competition in this segment of the transportation marketplace. My primary focus since April has been to make certain that all participants in a potential accident involving a TNC vehicle are covered by insurance to the limits required by the PUC and any legislation. The participants that I am referring to are the driver, the passenger, and any third party that may be injured by an at-fault TNC driver. It appears, based on discussions that I have had with one of the TNC providers, that my concerns are being satisfied. And I say that because since I first read the policy in April, I have read two updated additions, endorsements to those policies that are trying to amend their coverage language for this one particular TNC to address a lot of the concerns that were talked about here this morning. The typical personal auto policy has an exclusion, as Chairman DeLuca had mentioned earlier, that is worded something like the following. Coverage is excluded for that person's liability arising out of the ownership or operation of a vehicle while it is being used to carry persons or property for a fee. This exclusion has caused great concern, and in some instances, some uncovered liabilities, and put drivers of these vehicles in other states in great financial harm. When I talk to constituents, and these are real life examples, and I explain the scenario, I said, if there was a tragic accident and your child was injured in that accident and there was no recourse for payment of those bills, you would be contacting me saying, why didn't the PUC do something? So we want to make sure that moving forward, our drivers, our passengers, and visitors to our state, those that are having difficulty getting cabs on the south side of Pittsburgh, have an alternative, but they also are protected if they should they be injured. My legislation specifically prohibits a TNC from having a driver or a passenger sign a waiver of any rights of liability. The policies that I have read, one of the policies that I read, said that the driver is covered on this policy as long as they have a valid contract with the TNC. Well, I got a copy of the valid contract with the TNC, and there's a breach in there that says if the driver's personal auto policy does not provide coverage, that's a breach of the contract. It's my understanding, the TNC has denied this, it's my understanding, in speaking with a representative of the insurance company, the claims have been denied because of that. So my legislation would specifically prohibit any waivers being signed by the driver or the passenger on the application, and would also require that the insurance be primary. I think we'll probably hear later today from some of the insurance representatives that there are these current exclusions on the policies. I feel very strongly that the marketplace itself will take care of this, and that there will be some companies that will ultimately offer coverage for these individual drivers. They can certainly do it now on a commercial basis, but on a personal basis, but it's so new. Insurance companies are very conservative by nature, and they don't necessarily want to jump into something without knowing what the actual exposure is. But I do fear that there will be other companies that will put more restrictions on their personal policies, even limiting first-party medical payments, which is the passenger's own coverage for medical payments. If I could at this time read Representative Killian's letter, then I assume we'll be getting into some more specific questions. Thank you. Please accept this letter as my written comments for the Commission August 28th and banc hearing on transportation issues. As the elected representative for the 168th Legislative District, I have been watching the nascent transportation network companies enter markets throughout the state, and I'm very interested in ways that the rules and regulations governing all transportation companies can be modernized. To that end, I commend the Commission for its proactive actions in opening this docket and holding the banc hearing. And I hope I'm pronouncing that right. That's a new word for me. On August 11th, 2014, I circulated a co-sponsored memorandum to my fellow House members announcing my intent to introduce House Bill 2445. This proposed legislation, among other things, would require TNCs to, 1, obtain commercial liability insurance as primary coverage rather than a secondary umbrella policy, obtain a certificate of public convenience from the Commission, obtain and file criminal background checks on the network drivers with the Commission, obtain a special tag from PennDOT to provide easy identification for passengers. In addition, House Bill 2445 would exempt TNC service in a city of the first class, as the Philadelphia Parking Authority has separate jurisdiction. I encourage the Commission to support my legislative solution to the issues that have arisen surrounding TNCs and look forward to working with the Commissioners on House Bill 2445. Sincerely, Thomas H. Killian. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Questions from the commissioners?
Sure. I'd like to now recognize Commissioner Brown for purposes of her questions. Morning, Commissioner Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome to all the members of the legislature. I feel like I should be on that side over there, coming from the legislature and the Senate. I have several questions. I don't know that I'll ask all of them. I want to give my colleagues an opportunity, but I do want to start with the idea of we have the traditional taxi cab companies, and also we have these new TNCs. And I know with some of the legislation that has been introduced, the idea of rates is to allow them to be flexible with the TNC. So looking at our current regulations for taxi cabs, we have the requirement of their rates are under a tariff. So do you think that the Commission should review our regulations to look at the rates that we have for traditional taxi cab companies to allow them to be more flexible as it's being proposed under legislation for TNCs?
That's, I guess, an interesting question. When you look at the two models, though, you see that, taxi cabs rates are fixed, where the others are somewhat flexible and almost negotiable, from what I can tell. So, if you want to, go back and look at the taxi cabs, I think it's probably worth doing. But I don't know that they can operate as they are in the same capacity as the new ones that are now being authorized. So, but I think it's worth a look. I think, as time goes on, anything new reflects on what was happening, and it's worth re-evaluating it and taking a look. And I think that's maybe for another day, where we maybe get testimony from the taxi cab companies about their issues about setting fares and how they do it and how they could do it to make them more competitive going forward. So I think it's something that we definitely should look at.
As the senator said, I think it's a good question. I think maybe we should be looking at giving a little bit more flexibility to the taxi cab companies. But we also need to make sure that, based on your expertise and your experience, that the market will play out in that situation. But we have to remember there should be a little bit more flexibility with TNCs because of the fact these individuals are using their own car, the wear and tear that you have to take into consideration. So, I mean, you have two different situations there where you have a taxi cab company that owns the cabs, and you have a personal individual who has to maintain his vehicle. And so I think there has to be a little more leeway with TNCs. But I think we should be looking at, as Commissioner Whitmer said, that the fact is these rates and regulations haven't been looked at for a long time, and maybe it's time we start looking at it. Like a lot of legislation up here and that we have put into regulations go back a lot of years, and they need change. So I commend you for looking at this. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm very comfortable in speaking to the insurance aspect of this because that's been my business life for 35 years. I think we really need to rely on you and those that are testifying after us as it relates to the rates. Offhand, it would appear to me, based on what the city of Houston just did recently, for example, they passed an ordinance that requires the TNCs to have a certain percentage of vehicles that are handicap accessible. My understanding is the majority of the vehicles, if not all, that are being provided now by the TNCs are not handicap accessible. Yet the cab companies, I believe, are mandated to have a certain percentage. If that's correct, then I would assume that then is incorporated in the rates and the cost of doing business. So those are issues that I would like to push back to you.
Thank you. I just have one more quick question, and that's for Representative DeLuca. When you talked about, providing the individual providing notification that they have insurance and keeping that for a minimum of 3 years, I just didn't know if maybe you got that from another statute in another state, and I was just wondering which state.
No, we haven't got that from another statute. As far as I know, there isn't. The reason we use 3 years is because that's what the insurance industry uses to rate when they rate their individuals. They use a 3-year look-back period on the driver's record, accidents, and that there. So that's why we picked 3 years.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner Brown. I'd like to recognize Commissioner Cawley for purposes of his question. Commissioner Cawley.
Thank you, Chairman. I want to thank the 4 legislators who are here today. You've made a special effort to come to be with us, and I admire that. I particularly admire your efforts because they are needed. This commission has been demonized by those who do not want us to adhere to our oath of office, and that is to insist that the law be followed. Section 512 of the Public Utility Code provides that this commission has the responsibility to impose and enforce insurance requirements, quote, it deems necessary for the protection of persons or property of their patrons and the public. As Representative DeLuca has noted, certain entities that are operating in Pittsburgh claim to be ride-sharing companies, which I believe is disingenuous in the extreme, because as Pennsylvania law provides elsewhere, a ride-sharing arrangement is transportation which is incidental to a driver's purpose, meaning the driver cannot be engaged in the business of transportation, which is undefined in the law. But if these independent operators are not in the business of transportation, I don't know what business of transportation could possibly be. But they have called themselves ride-sharing companies to exclude themselves from the Pennsylvania law as it exists now, which would mean that they would be exempt from public utility status. They would be exempt from special insurance requirements for motor carriers. They would be exempt from laws imposing a greater standard of care on motor carriers by vehicle, and they would be exempt from laws imposing special equipment requirements and special accident reporting requirements. So we desperately need legislation which would define how these carriers operate. And because of your efforts, I frankly reluctantly voted to give temporary authority to these entities, because it became apparent early on that they were not protecting their passengers or the public, because their insurance requirements were totally inadequate. And I'm still concerned that even under the requirements that we placed in our temporary authority orders, that we have not covered all the bases. I'm particularly concerned that there are still gaps. For instance, I'm concerned that we have not provided that end runs may occur by imposing conditions on drivers that they, and passengers, that they waive the protections that we're trying to impose and that you're trying to impose. Because I think we all know when somebody opens their smartphone and they push the buttons and they accept the conditions of service, it would be all too easy for them to be unwittingly agreeing to waive the rights that you and we are trying to put in place. And therefore, I'm particularly thankful that you have highlighted these concerns for us and that you're making an effort to put these protections in place. You're doing the public a great service, and I hope that however the legislative process works its way to a resolution, that we have adequate legislation in place before this session is done. So I compliment you on your efforts, and particularly your efforts to get it done as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Cawley. Now I'd like to recognize Commissioner Whitmer for purposes of her questions. Commissioner Whitmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you again to our legislative panel for making an effort to come in this morning and share your views. I just have one general question, and you can all answer it, or one, or however you feel fit. What has been sort of the reaction from your constituents? We certainly read and have gotten a lot of mail and communication from supporters and detractors, but I was just wondering, folks who come into your office or who call your offices and speak to you directly, are you hearing the same types of support that certainly the media is suggesting is out there?
Well, I can tell you, I track all my emails, and I've gotten hundreds of emails in support of Uber and Lyft just into my office. And sometimes I get things and they're staged or form emails. Well, these aren't. They weren't. They were all talking from experience and saying how much easier it is to get around the city and to use that. They specifically said and mentioned the gaps that there were in service. Some recited past bad experiences from not being able to get cabs. I got it from the social groups. I got it from the business groups, just folks trying to get to the airport on a business trip, folks out at night trying to get to a theater or to a restaurant. So I heard a variety of things, and hundreds, not just a few. And then out and about I'm hearing it from restaurant owners and bartenders. It's so much easier to get someone into some transportation, alternative transportation, besides letting them drive. So I've heard nothing negative. It's amazing. It's all been very, very positive. But to everyone's point, we have to make it safe and viable and make sure it's done properly, and that's what we're here to do.
Commissioner, I also can reiterate what Senator Fontana says. Everything's been positive. They haven't been the emails that you get that are canned emails, and it seems like they're in favor of it, and for various reasons, as he reiterated. And I think it's here to stay. Other states are starting to look at it. I think California's ready to pass it. So we just got to make sure that we do it right. It's not going away. I think as other states gravitate towards it, I think the main thing is if we do it right, then I think our constituents will benefit from it. So I look forward to working with you, and I'm sure all of us up here, working with the PUC after this legislation to make sure that we cover all the bases, Commissioner Cawley, and make sure that we try to, can't cover everything, but we've got to make sure that if we see some things there that we need to cover it. So we're looking forward to working with you. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. I share my colleagues' sentiments about this. I've received hundreds of emails in support of the new ride-sharing companies operating in Pittsburgh. It's changed the way people get around. Again, as Senator Fontana mentioned, it's about getting home safely at the end of the night for some folks. It's about getting to the theater on time. It's about reliability, knowing that somebody's going to pick you up. Can honestly say that actually we track the number of emails and constituent letters we get about certain topics, and this has been the number one topic of interest in my district as of late. So surpassing some of what I would think would be also hot button topics like the UPMC Highmark merger and things like that. So I think that says a lot. And on top of that, you know, the feedback that I've heard too from other stakeholders in Pittsburgh, not necessarily my own constituents, but other stakeholders have said to me, you know, it would be a tragedy not to figure out a way to make this work for Pittsburgh. So many major metropolitan cities have these ride-sharing companies operating, and it would be embarrassing for us to not seek out a way to help foster innovation in Pittsburgh, especially given what's going on with Pittsburgh lately. You know, we are a growing city. We are, you know, an amazingly progressive city, and I think that it would be embarrassing if we stepped back and said, no, we're not going to accept this innovation. I think, are charged with something for the first time in a long time, as Representative DeLuca mentioned, is coming up with regulations for innovation. Innovation has to come almost before the regulation, because the new idea to solve the problem comes first. And then we regulate it on the back end. It's reactive. So I really want to thank the commissioners. I want to thank the PUC for taking a chance and being very deliberate about this, but also accepting and embracing this kind of innovation where it's so desperately needed in our city. Thank you.
I would agree. Both of my children moved from the suburbs and now live in the city of Pittsburgh. And the city's changing. I can tell you that I've gotten a handful of emails because my district is a little different and don't utilize it as often, but they're in support. I'm in support. When we have people come from other states that have passed legislation enabling this and the protections are in place there, how do they know we don't have them here? They still have the Uber app or the Lyft app on their phone. They're going to use it. So I think we have a responsibility, as my constituent said, to fix it. And you know, my son, as an example, over the weekend, they had their football draft with his buddies, and they ended up going downtown Pittsburgh. I said, well, who's driving? He said, we're taking a limo down, and we're going to get Uber home. That's how they're going to do it. Nobody says, they didn't say cab. I mean, that's just a totally different generation, but I want to make sure that generation's protected. And I think County Executive Fitzgerald said it really well at the press conference we had in Pittsburgh, where, you know, when his kids are out at night, he wants to make sure they're home safely. And if there is no cab option, they're going to take Uber or Lyft, and they're going to get home safely, as opposed to driving or having somebody else drive them that shouldn't be driving. So that's what this is all about. Thank you.
Thank you. Vice Chairman Coleman.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, and again, I want to thank all of you for coming this morning and spending your time with us on what I view as a very, very important topic here at the Commission. But beyond that, I want to thank a number of you for the comments in the field. As Commissioner Colley has indicated, that this topic has certainly brought a lot of attention to this Commission. And it's not lost on us that there is a need for service, but need does not trump safety, and it will not at this Commission. And I think that we have taken the appropriate action to do what we believe is right in terms of protecting the safety of Pennsylvanians. So we're here this morning with an opportunity to modernize what we do in regulating transportation. And in the spirit of enhancing competition across the state of Pennsylvania, the one point that I guess I'd be curious of your comments on is in the current regulations, it requires companies to demonstrate need for service in a particular jurisdiction in the state of Pennsylvania before they can be certificated. And that has also become a significant tension point in a number of the proceedings, in fact, in nearly all of the transportation proceedings before this commission, where those who are in the marketplace will object to those looking to enter into the marketplace. So it sets up a very interesting dynamic here in Pennsylvania. So in the theme of competition and the theme of being here this morning and trying to embrace and support technology, I'm curious of your comments to the need regulation as part of the Commission's current regulations.
Well, I think it's basically up to the regulators to determine if there's a need. But as I mentioned earlier, my constituents are saying there's a need. But I think everyone, to the rest of your point, people have a right to protest. They have a right to question. They have a right to understand what's going on. They have a right to say it should be fair. It should be. So I think that's okay. You know, there's nothing wrong with that. And I think it's your job to hear all those viewpoints and understand them. The only thing I would probably suggest or think is that during those protests, as long as you feel the company or the entity is doing things properly, you let that happen until you've heard all the sides of the story and make a decision. But everyone certainly has the right to do that, but to protest and to question. But in this particular case, there's no question there was a need, and I think you've seen that by our testimony and our efforts to bring legislation forth for all the reasons that have been stated here. And I think you made that determination that there is a need. But I also think the protests are well taken, and you should be hearing them and make a decision based on that too. So thank you.
I agree with the Senator that it's up to the Commission to decide on some of the needs. But as we move forward in the technology age, things have changed. Everybody, the younger generation today is technology savvy. So things change. And it's not like years ago when if I wanted to start a taxi cab service or a bus service, the big players would come in and says, you know, we're providing need. In their estimation, they're giving testimony on their needs. So what happens is nobody is able to get into the transportation industry. That's changed. We didn't have that technology before. Now we do have a new technology. And as I said before, if we do it right, I think it'd be good for the Commonwealth. I think it would be good for the public. The main thing I'm going to reiterate is making sure that we get it right. This is happening in a lot of other states. All the states are starting to look at this. We certainly don't want to be one of the states who, just because we have other individuals coming in and say, well, there's not a need for it. That will be your determination. But we have to remember that sometimes as new technology comes, I could see where it's beneficial, where you could call up, you can get your same driver all the time. You can't get that in a taxi cab service. You can be rated, and from what I understand, they rate their drivers. So I think there's a lot of good things that could come out of it, and it would help a lot of individuals who are maybe going to school part-time. And if they're not providing the service right, it'll fall on their own need in that there. So, but you're going to be the ones who are going to decide the need of it. And I think we also have to look at the new technology in the new IT age in that today. Thank you.
My testimony was almost exclusively about need. I wanted to make sure that I came here today and kind of gave examples of need and how there's been kind of an outcry for over a decade now in the city of Pittsburgh for solutions to how we move people around. And, this being the Public Utility Commission, obviously safety and being an advocate for Pennsylvanians is of top concern. I would say of top concern even more so than how the market plays out with the introduction of new business to it. I think that Representative DeLuca is correct. This is about making sure that there is a service for people who need the service in the city of Pittsburgh, and it's safe. We have people that are trying to get home late at night from work, working late shifts. Sometimes buses aren't always running at that time. We have young people that want to get around their city and want to explore different neighborhoods and want to be able to get home safely at the end of the night to enjoy the theaters and the culture and the restaurants and the entertainment. We have people who attend our sporting events, our Pirate games, our Steeler games that want to get home and maybe don't want the hassle of parking near the stadium and sitting in traffic for 45 minutes. This is just another option for people. And I think, too, that what this has done is also it's introduced drivers into the market, which has been really interesting. People are talking about some of the shortcomings. People are talking about their experiences using social media on Facebook, on Twitter. One of my constituents regularly posts about his experiences as an Uber driver, which I think is, pretty bold, right? To put out there, here's what I do, and here's the outcome, and I'm meeting all these interesting people. I'm getting to know my city better, and I'm enjoying it. And I think, being the Public Utility Commission, I think safety and advocating for Pennsylvanians to make sure the service is safe, is absolutely top of mind. Secondary being how the market plays out with the new competition. Thank you.
I'm not sure what questions are asked on a certificate of need application, but everything that they just said should be up there. And I'm not so sure that this is taking as much business as we think from the traditional cab companies. I think it's bringing a whole new dynamic and a demographic of people that are using transportation in a different way, as opposed to using their own personal vehicle in some cases when they shouldn't be doing it. I think years ago there was a certificate of need required in the health field. That went away, and that ended up probably increasing costs, but it certainly made more availability of certain types of service. But every hospital had a certain piece of equipment as opposed to just going to one center for it. So again, that's why you guys get paid the big bucks to make these tough decisions. We're just here to try and help work with you to get the legislation passed to protect and to enable those markets. And I'm very sympathetic to what Commissioner Colley said earlier. That was one of my biggest frustrations in working through this, is I could see in black and white, and I know from 35 years of experience, where people weren't covered, yet they were continuing to push the envelope there. But I don't know that we would be sitting here today had they not pushed the envelope either. So hopefully nothing had happened where somebody wasn't covered. I'm not aware of anything like that, but it did bug me a little bit. But you do have on your Form E, and this is digressing from the question, your Form E that you require of these companies, the insurance carrier sends it to you, and they sign on there that says whenever you request a copy of their coverage, they have to give it to you. And it's not the carrier, it's the insurance company that's providing it. So I'd verify it.
Thank you all again, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Vice Chairman. I want to pick up on, I think, the theme that carries this morning's discussion, and I think Representative Mustia, you hit on it. Fair, safe, competitive transportation options for consumers, your constituents here in Pennsylvania. And let me just say, I am a suffering Philadelphia Eagles fan, and I'm looking out at all these Pittsburgh people going, oh. So we have heard loud and clear from your constituents, from the mayor, from the county executive, of this gap in transportation service. And so I want to throw a couple things out because Representative Mulcahy, you hit on it. You know, we talk about innovation and look at Pittsburgh as a growing area. You know, Google's vested there. A lot of exciting things happening. And, you know, we've heard from the business community. I mean, the Allegheny Conference weighed in on this particular issue, telling us that there is this gap in transportation. And we hear anecdotally, and I'm going to throw it back to you, the incumbent cab companies are only worried about ride service from downtown to the international airport, and that's it. If you have on-demand service, we probably wouldn't be here today. And we're going to hear later that no, that's not the case. People call us and we're there on time and we pick them up, and we've never had this blemish. I come from the school, trust but verify. So on the verification piece, do you think an onus should be put back on the commission where we regulate transportation? We should be required, to Representative Mulcahy's point, do a statewide ridership survey so we can hear from constituents of how they feel about their transportation options in a particular county, because I think we all agree, and I've said this to many policymakers, I've said it to Governor Corbett, this is not a Pittsburgh-centric issue. They're coming to State College, they're coming to my area of Westchester, Pennsylvania, and they're going to be vested here. And I think that is important to the state to embrace innovation, embrace investment from these companies that want to do business here. But I want to pick up on this ridership survey piece because I think it ties into your innovation theme, that maybe we need to innovate a little bit and look at issues where we see gaps in transportation, that it would drive outcomes here at the commission to address a gap in, again, transportation options to come. So I want to pick up on that. Is it something you look at in your legislation? And I'm actually asking you to mandate something at us. So, but I just want to throw that out because the email, we got the same emails. We heard loud and clear. I mean, and that's great. That's the way the process is supposed to work. But I just took a note. When you said a ridership survey, we don't do that now. And had we done that, we probably would have known a lot more about this issue that was emerging. We did see it in other states coming, but I want to pick up on that issue of ridership survey. What are your thoughts there?
Well, I think it's a good idea. I think anything like that, if you can get out in front of it, it helps. And we've heard about Uber and Lyft in other states, but we didn't do anything until they came here. So they got here first and so we weren't prepared, basically. Now we're trying to get prepared. So anything you can do to get out in front of this issue, because as you mentioned, and I think one of the conversations we had is that you just don't want to write legislation for Allegheny County and Pittsburgh. You want to write it for the whole state. So any other city that gets it, it falls right in. So we're trying to get in front of something that's already in front of us, basically. So anything you can do to get out in front on any issue, on any new and innovative technology, because that technology, these apps are happening in every industry, in the financial industry, everywhere. Even been talking about in the real estate industry, showing houses differently, buying your financial products differently, at discount prices because of it. I mean, it's cheaper, it's saving money for the consumer. So if we can get out in front to do that, and I think that's part of what the PUC should be doing, is looking at things that can help the consumer do things better, more efficiently, more effectively. So yes, I think it's a good idea.
I also think it's a good idea, and it's something that we, and I know what you reiterated, that you would like to see it mandated in the legislation. It's something I certainly will take a look at. It's easy to say it's a good idea, but maybe it is something we should put into legislation mandate, because how could you be against it? I mean, it'll show benefits one way or the other. And as you said, it's not a Pittsburgh issue, it's a Commonwealth issue. So we'll certainly take a look at that. Thank you.
I think that surveys are great. I think that the companies that we're talking about pretty specifically, I know that there's an ability to rate your drivers, which is essentially taking a survey about the service that you just had. If a driver scores low, then they're probably not going to get many rides down the pike. But if they score high, they're going to be in demand. People are going to want to ride with them. And I think that that's a good example of how surveys can help to grow something and to foster the innovation and hold people accountable, frankly. And I think surveys are a great idea. I think we don't really understand what's going on out there if we can't thoughtfully collect data to see what's really going on out there. I think there are a lot of opportunities given today's technology to collect information and survey riders and survey people who take advantage of the service in a really simple, quick way. I have to be very honest, if I got in a taxi tomorrow, I wouldn't know how to lodge a complaint. 1-800 numbers are not the thing that I relate to most. I want to pick up my smartphone. I want to click and, kind of tell you what's going on. So I think that we can definitely introduce something that I would favor doing something that definitely surveys people in their service, understanding the market, understanding, the quality of the service, the safety component, but keeping it simple, making it very accessible to people. I mean, people are already kind of giving us their feedback on Facebook unsolicited. I can't imagine this would complicate things anymore.
I agree and look forward to your help in drafting that.
Okay. I have one.
Mr. Chairman, I would just like to suggest that if you're going to mandate us do a survey, maybe you can give us a little money to make sure we get it done.
Well, a great footnote. So here's my last question. And we have been caught up in we'll call it this vortex of looking at other jurisdictions, looking at insurance liability coverages. And I know Representative Mustio, you're a certified property casualty and underwriter, so you know this issue. Is right now, under the temporary emergency authority approval, that two entities were required to produce a Form E document. If I look at that Form E document that's on record now, it says that that entity, that TNC, that'll go nameless here, both have $1 million of liability coverage for any incident covered when the moment the app is open to a moment a common carrier, meaning a passenger, is moved in common carrier status to point A to point B. If I, in preparation for this hearing, look at our current monopoly cab regulations, monopoly cabs in this Commonwealth are required to have $35,000 of coverage, but yet these new entities that are coming into our market are providing $1 million of coverage. So my question to you is, does a tide rise all boats in insurance markets to require incumbent cabs to move towards the direction of proper liability coverage that we're putting forth on TNC? So I'll let you take up that question.
My legislation does not require $1 million. My legislation requires $35,000. The companies can always buy more if it's available in the marketplace. My concern with putting $1 million in the legislation with the other requirements that are in the legislation is a change from what the original policy that was issued that I read in April to what was amended in July. And there's only one carrier, insurance company I'm aware of that's providing this coverage, and they're not an admitted carrier, I believe. So I may be wrong on that point, but the point is there's only one insurance company providing it. So if we start mandating higher limits, I'm not sure what impact that's going to have on the marketplace. For cabs, I don't know what a current cab company has. If they only have $35,000 themselves, then that's not really protecting much of their bottom line, and that's not very good risk management practices, so they're not going to be around very long. But they always have the availability to purchase more insurance. So that's why if we're going to mandate it higher for companies, then why aren't we mandating it higher for individuals? I mean, if the trial lawyers are testifying later, I'm sure they would be in support of that. But I'm not so sure that that's where we are at this point. So in my legislation, I stuck at the $35,000 limit because I wasn't sure market capacity at this point, because they don't know what they really don't know what they have yet. And that was a concern.
And just to pick up on that before I recognize Commissioner Cawley, we've heard anecdotally, and you're right, the one surplus lines company that's offering the product to customers. I mean, you said in your testimony, you recognize the market needs to catch up with offering some type of coverage option to the TNCs. I see that market evolving, but it's not there yet. I mean, you have the one company in Richmond that is providing that coverage. But I think going back to what we'll probably hear from the Insurance Federation is a primary insurance carrier is deeply concerned that a driver would come back to them and say, well, my app wasn't open, I got an offender bender, you're covering me. Well, are you using that on you were moving people for commercial basis. So that's going to create that's where I think we have this gap. In California, to its credit, has addressed that in their stage 2 and 3 requirements of when the app's being used. And that's something I want to take up with Senator Fontana offline, that we look at that. And I think a lot of this discussion this morning goes back to the insurance gaps that need to be addressed.
Well, and the legislation I have tries to address that issue too, to make it perfectly clear that the TNC is responsible for that. And I understand in meeting with them, we had a meeting with them and the insurance people in the same room, which was interesting. Their concern is, could the driver then potentially commit frauds because his app's open? Well, that's fraud. But on the other hand, the insurance companies, I am certain, will start to amend their exclusion. It won't just say while carrying, they'll say while the app is on. So it's going to be excluded anyway. And to point earlier, I will disagree with the Insurance Federation on this point. I don't think it's the responsibility of the TNC nor the driver to notify the insurance company that they are a TNC driver. The insurance companies can ask that on their applications. Insurance companies can ask that on their surveys that they do of every policyholder when they want updates on what's going on in that household. And the insurance brokers can certainly make their clients aware that this is not covered. So I think that's an overburdensome thing to require a TNC to do, and an overburdensome requirement of the driver, particularly when we're pushing to have the TNCs be the primary insurance carrier in the first place.
Commissioner Call, you had a question.
Well, first of all, I want to make it clear that when I was describing under current law a true ride-sharing entity, that I don't want you to change that. These entities are not what the law currently contemplates, and that is friends and co-workers banding together to share gasoline and driving responsibilities. The current law is meant to exclude them. I think what we need and what you're trying to do is to deal with the true business enterprise situation which we have here. So I'm assuming you're going to leave that alone and you're going to deal with just true so-called TNCs. But you've, Representative Musto, you have raised the issue of our Form E, and others have suggested to us that we should be carefully examining, you and others, that we should be looking at all of these insurance policies to make sure that there aren't exclusions that are slipped in which deprive people of the protections that we all are trying to ensure here. We rely on Form E now. We do not look at individual insurance policies, and I'm wondering if we have to suddenly get in the business of looking and developing expertise to see that such exclusions don't sneak in. So can we rely on Form E, or do we have to go further?
I'm not a lawyer or put myself out to be one, but the federal government, when hazardous materials are being used, use the MCS 90 endorsement, which basically has a clause in there that takes all of the argument out of it. The insurance company pays the claim, then they go back against the insured if it's not covered, as opposed to having a scenario where the claim's presented to the insurance company and it's denied. And we have the headlines that we've had that Representative DeLuca mentioned earlier. So I don't know what the legal requirements are for changing the Form E or putting that wording on there, any of that. But I know there is a difference. Basically, the MCS 90 is like a bond which guarantees payment of the claim. When it happens, there's not going to be any argument. The insurance company's paying that claim. If they have recourse against some other party, meaning the insured themselves, then they'll do that. But right now, I'm really skeptical of the coverage because of the contract that had to be signed. Now, that's why we're trying to address it in the legislation that I have to make sure that you cannot sign away your rights and that there is primary insurance. So I think that would give you a lot more sense of calm if that's in place, and I might have more faith in a Form E. If the Form E is truly a valid document that says the insurance company policy says what the state law says that the commission's carrying out. If that's a true statement and that's been held up in court, then you should have faith in it. If our legislation passes with those requirements, I would think. But again, I'm not a lawyer. I'll defer to anyone else on the council here that might be.
Okay. Well, I want to thank the panel, and more importantly, we have a very narrow window here in the fall in which I think in true bipartisan fashion, we can move this legislation. And Senator Fontana, I think we all agree in the letter that we sent to you, 5 of us, stressing the importance of working with you and your colleagues and in the House to advance this legislation. Again, I want to thank you, all of you, for making the trip into Harrisburg today to participate. And we, again, look forward to working with you, hopefully in the next couple of weeks, to get 102, 26, and 1 to solve this calculus equation. As my good friend, former Speaker of the House, Matt Ryan, would remind me, you could come up with a cure for world hunger, Rob, but if you don't have 102, 26, and 1, it doesn't happen. So we look forward to working with you. And again, I thank you for your participation here this morning. It's been very insightful. Thank you. I'd like to now get our next panel assembled. We're going to avert the break. We want to keep things moving here. So we're going to give everybody on the next panel an opportunity to get assembled. And we'll start here in about 5 minutes. So we'll take a little stretch break, colleagues.